So on the climate change one, we had a representative from Richard Ndo from World Vision in Zimbabwe and Patrick Kiria from Buseno Fruits, which is a private company that works with smallholder farmers in Uganda. And so we talked a lot about some of the resilience design work that we're doing on TOPS, which is focused on building soil and water health and building resilience for smallholder farmers by improving farm design. Richard talked about some of the work that they were doing in Zimbabwe around that topic, and also they'd attended the training that we did on resilience design and so how that affected their work. He also raised an interesting point about how they had done a water survey that had informed the activities that they decided on in the project. So basically looking at groundwater informed their choices of activities, and people thought that was a great idea to look at possibly monitoring impact later on in the project. And then Patrick talked about the company that's involved in, how he's working with smallholder farmers, and we also did a field trip to his farm, which was great to see a lot of kind of resilience design activities in practice. So then the seed systems and markets one, we had a couple of different presenters at that one. We had Astrid, who was from Wageningen University. We had Charles, who was a managing director of a private company, and we had Tracy Mitchell from the Mercy Corps program, who talked about an e-vouchers program, part of the program that they were doing. And so basically those three presenters all looked at different ways of addressing seed supply. Astrid was coming more at kind of producing seed through local small groups. Charles was looking at it more from bigger private sector seed production company end. And then Tracy from Mercy Corps was looking at how they were using e-vouchers to get seeds, to get farmers linked up with seed suppliers. So rather than using kind of paper credit notes and things, they were using e-vouchers, which also meant that they had an immediate dashboard that they could then track who was buying from when and where, and that also kind of fed into the program management activities. So that was an interesting session. And then the final of the three that we kind of moderated was around youth, particularly focused on agriculture, but it also had a very strong gender focus to it as well. And so we had Malaku Yerga from Mercy Corps in Uganda talking about some of the work that they've been doing in Uganda and Kenya. Jane Luikizuka, who was from Concern, I think it was. Sorry, just check that one. Sorry, she was from Goal. And she's been working in youth for a long time and at least about 10 years in Uganda. So she had some really great insights into what they were doing with ag programming. And then we also had Faith Okello, who was a young female farmer working with Jane on the program that she works with between Goal and Mercy Corps. And she just provided her insights as to how she had got involved in agriculture, how she'd kind of, both her and Jane really was kind of presenting evidence from some of the programs that they'd worked on that a lot of the things that we hear are that young, particularly women, are not so interested in agriculture. They're all wanting to move out. What they were finding was actually they were really interested in it. They did actually have the land, and they kind of needed support to get going. But obviously they were still interested in a lot of the more ICT side of things too. So Faith was just great to hear her story, and I think people kind of really were interested in that, just kind of the struggles, where she come from and where she was going. So Abby and Eric, I don't know if you have any other additional points to add to those sessions. Abby and Eric both led, as Eric led the seed session and Abby led the youth one. So I'm going to move to Eric to give us an update from the region, and then following Eric, Abby can give us an update from HQ. But as you're doing your pieces there, if there's any other pieces that you wanted to add to the knowledge sharing meeting, then please do. Welcome to those who asked.
Great, thanks, Andrea. A few updates from the East and Southern Africa region. We are continuing to release case studies. These case studies are short, 3 to 4 pages on different ag programs throughout the region. They're intended to help identify what practices are going well in the field and try to get those out to the community before a final evaluation or a midterm evaluation, when it's generally a few years after the activities have completed. Since July, we've released 3. We released 1 on ACDI VOCA's micro-irrigation practices in Uganda, 1 on the USAID Food for Peace programs in Malawi and Zimbabwe, and how they've interacted in conducting cross visits with local organizations, and also the e-voucher system Mercy Corps is implementing in Karamoja. The next one will come out in the next week or so, and it's looking at how TechnoServe has integrated gender into their ag programming. So the link for that is at the bottom of the screen. Also, we've done a permagarden refresher. I led one up in Karamoja. Permagarden is the home garden method that was developed through TOPS. The home garden network in Ethiopia, which has about 140 members, if any of your staff are interested in joining. We rolled a training of trainers out through them in February, and they are continuing to cascade it down. In August, they trained regional and national Ministry of Ag and Natural Resource Management staff, Ethiopian government staff, who are then planning to go through the government to cascade it. We're also talking with an organization about rolling this out in refugee camps in Chad as well. And then finally, we've conducted a few cross visits. We did one in Malawi with Penzuzi, which is a local organization working in schools. And so the 2 Food for Peace programs joined us. We had about 45 staff members. And then we had 1 to Busano Fruits after the knowledge sharing meeting in Uganda, looking at his climate smart ag practices and how he's diversified his farm into business. So we have links that we'll share with you on that. If any of your organizations are interested in having a case study released through TOPS, or if you're interested in having TOPS facilitate a cross visit in the region, feel free to reach out to me anytime. And then over to you, Abby.
Thanks, Eric. And Eric, if you don't mind writing your email in the chat box, just so folks have it if they are interested in a case study. And then from the headquarters level, we have the Resilience Design and Smallholder Farming Systems Toolkit that we've been working on for a little while. We're working with 3 consultants and are hoping to have a draft out early next year, and we will make sure that you guys are aware of that as it comes to completion. And we also have the core competency resource list that I'm sure all of you are aware of, has been worked on for the past 6 to 12 months. And it is also nearing completion. We are working kind of on layouts now, and I would love to get your input on kind of the usability of it in its next iteration. It should be coming out in the next month, so we'll make sure to pass that along to the task force members as soon as it is ready. And then lastly, we did a TOPS and Spring Nutrition Sensitive Value Chains event in October, on October 26th in DC. And many of you that are in the room today were at that event, so thanks so much for joining. And Andrea is going to talk a little bit about it later, but it was a great mix of nutrition and ag folks, people from the for-profit and nonprofit sectors, as well as USAID. So it's just a really interesting mix of people in the room to kind of dive into the discussion on nutrition-sensitive value chains. And you can see at the bottom of your screen, there is a link to the post-event resources on the FSN network. So if you weren't able to be there, you're welcome to go read through the notes and see the various presentations. And so with that, I will pass it back to Andrea to talk about our plans for the coming months.
Great, thanks, Abby. I'm just going to pause there for a minute and just open it up if anyone had any particular questions on things that have been happening since July, the things that we've just talked about. So just give it a minute or so, see if anyone has any questions. Please feel free to write in the chat box too. And I think if you do want to speak, actually, you can just raise your hand, and Abby will have taken off the microphones as well. All right. Okay. So, upcoming plans. We've just had our TOPS annual planning meeting in DC the week before last, or the week before that. Time goes quick. So we've just been laying out our plan for until the end of June, which is the current end of activities for TOPS, with the actual closeout at the end of mid-August. And so we'll be working on some more details for training events that are coming up, some of the finalization of tools and things like that. But ones that we've got on our immediate kind of plate are, we have a financial planning guide that is actually finalized already. We're just finalizing a business plan appendix to go with that. So that is the third or fourth in the series of these short guides that are on the Epicent network. We did one on farmer field schools, one on post-harvest, and one on agroforestry. The aim of those guides is to really just kind of summarize the key information points of each topic, and then lead people to the key resources. So if you're in the field, what are your top resources that you should be aware of if you're working in that area? So and the financial planning one has a little bit more information because there are fewer tools out there available for everybody to access, and so it has templates and things in there for cash flows and profit analysis and things like that. We are also working on the Resilience Design Toolkit. So I think many of you already know about that, but that is a design approach that we've been working on with a couple of consultants that builds from soil and water techniques that people are generally already implementing in the field. But what this approach does is kind of just take a bit of a step back, look at external influences to the site, whether it be a farm or a wider landscape water catchment area, and gets us to just kind of reevaluate what's happening on the site, and then look at designing a site with those influences kind of factored in, and then from there identifies and combines techniques that work together, which normally are the techniques that people are looking at already, but it just kind of takes that step back and looks at where we're using them, how we're using them, and how we can combine them for biggest effect. So we're hoping to finish drafting at the end of this year, and then we'll have the editors working on it beginning of next year, so that should come out January, February. And then the third one is the seed security or seed response event that we have in February. So I'll just move to a little bit more detail on that one. And so this will be on February 2nd in Washington. And Louise Sperling, who I think many of you already know, she's currently the Senior Technical Advisor for Ag and Livelihoods with CRS, but has been really at the kind of front of seed systems development for quite a number of years. And so we're just going to have a half-day event. Louise is going to share some practical insights for looking at seed security with smallholder farmers, particularly in Africa. She's going to provide a review of the latest tools to help identify diverse seed security constraints and implementation responses to address common resilience and nutrition constraints. For example, looking at diversity in nutrition fairs, vegetable seed interventions, small seed packet outlets. This kind of relates a little bit to the seed session that we had in Uganda at the knowledge sharing event. You can find more information, as Abby says, at the links in those web links at the bottom of the screen. And so, as Louise says, it's geared to the lay agricultural expert in a way, and we'll kind of discuss building capacity for seed security analysis and design. And so that was kind of a short summary that we've worked on with Louise, and she was really interested in getting feedback from the group here to inform the real kind of content of that. So you'll see at the bottom of that slide there are a couple of questions which would be great if you can provide some feedback on now. So we just have a few minutes, maybe 5 minutes, before we move into the ag nutrition part of the session. So Louise particularly is interested in knowing what would you like to learn related to this theme. So around seed systems, what is it that you're interested in learning about from her that she can include in the session? And what intervention phase are you most interested in? And with that, we mean immediate post-emergency, recovery, chronic stress phase, and stable environment. So those three kind of phases. So with that, I'm just going to open it up. If anyone has any thoughts on that, if you've been working with seed systems or not, and you're interested in specific topics that we can make sure that we cover in that session, it'd be really useful to get your thoughts on that.
Hi, this is Laura Austin. So can you hear me?
We can.
Great. Awesome. I'm sorry I was late, but I caught the end of this. And I guess the feedback I would put in is that here at Partnering for Innovation, in terms of seeds, the sale and distribution of produced seeds seems like it's gaining a lot of traction and knowledge around it, but a lot of times it's production capacity in a national context that's actually the constraint. So less like that we're able to figure out just distribution channels and more that there's just not a lot of capacity for seed production.
Great, thanks, Laura. At the event in Uganda, there's some information from there. Astrid from Wageningen University is working on a program where they were looking at that issue too. So working with smaller groups to bulk up seed that was already kind of accredited seed. So there's a little bit of information there, but that would be great feedback for Louise. Thank you, Laura.
Can you hear me? This is Dan Norell.
Hi, Dan. We can.
Great. I would suggest regarding within market systems the role of village agents to be able to have last mile distribution system for seeds, improve seed, and we've had some good results within our DFAP in Niger on that. And so again, the importance of, as we think about nutrition-sensitive value chains, but certainly in terms of that being part of that is the last mile distribution for seeds in the input markets.
Great, thanks, Dan. And if you or any of your colleagues are available to go to the event in February 2nd, that would be great to just kind of share some of that knowledge and information as well.
Great.
Yeah, this is Gitao. Just to add to that, can you hear me?
Yes, Gitao, I can hear you.
Okay. Just to add to that, I would like to see the event also address access to vegetative seed. I feel like a lot of times there's justifiably focus on seed for cereals mostly, but for example in DRC we've been working with farmers to access to multiply cassava cuttings and also sweet potato vines, and it's interesting. It's a totally different approach when you look at seed from that angle. And I would hope that the event would also diversify in that direction.
Great, thanks, Gitao. And actually, I remember someone raising a question at the event in Uganda on that too, that vegetable seed access is an even bigger challenge than the bigger crop. So, okay, perfect. Okay. Okay, so I think if other people have Lad, sorry, within your mic's not working, but in addition to village workers to distribute seeds, it's important to have village seed sellers or community agro dealers linked to private input suppliers. Yes, absolutely agreed. And actually, Mercycorps was trying to work with that a little bit with the e-vouchers program. They were also looking at providing some vouchers further down the value chain for the bigger seed suppliers to buy from the bigger seed suppliers, but then sorted out the credit issues that they were having to then provide seed to the smaller kind of local seed sellers. So yeah, I completely agree that's a huge issue. So I'll make sure that that's added as well. Brilliant. Okay, so I think we'll leave it there for this discussion, but if you have other ideas, put them in the chat box. Please feel free to email any of us as well, and or the task force group, email the serve group if you have other ideas, or if you have examples of projects that have really worked well from your agencies and you'd like to share some of that learning as well, then that would be really interesting. Okay, great. All right. Okay, so switching gear pretty quickly there, just because we only have an hour for today. So, nutrition-sensitive ag value chains, what are they? Why are we talking about them? Why did we talk about them in DC? And what do we do next? So I think pretty much everyone knows what a value chain is, but just in case you don't, it's basically a full series of activities looking at bringing a product from, or a service, from its conception to the final consumers and disposal. And so as a product passes through those activities, it gains value along the way. And so stakeholders along those activities can be anything from input suppliers to the farmers themselves to transporters, market sellers, right the way up to consumers. And obviously, as we know, traditionally, and the reason that we have had value chain programs is that they're focused on increasing income, ultimately for the farmer, but also looking at other stakeholders in the value chain. And so as ag nutrition has become increasingly interesting and increasingly incorporated into programs over the last few years, people have started to look a lot more at value chains and whether they can, in addition to having that income focus, can also have a nutrition sensitive lens, or can they be nutrition focused as well? And so we found that a lot of people have been talking about it, a lot of people were doing it, but it's still a challenge, and so we decided to co-host the event with Spring in Washington. The aim of that event, as Abby has said, was to bring as many people. We wanted to keep it small, so we had about 30 people invited that were kind of applied and were invited. And then we wanted to kind of expand it across as many organizations as possible. So we just had one, in some cases, 2 representatives from an organization. So we had 20 different organizations from mostly from non-profits, a lot from profit, and a lot from USAID as well, both Feed the Future and Food for Peace. And so what we did was just kind of start the day talking about why they're useful or not, a little bit about that. And then we had 4 World Cafe style discussion sessions effectively. And so Laura Ostenso, who's just on the call, talks about FinTrack's partnership with a company called Ethno Chicken in Ethiopia, and has some really interesting information about what they've been doing around value chains in that context. Heather Danton from Spring and some of the other of her team talked about outcomes along the ag nutrition pathways, and so they were looking more at some of the monitoring elements of the pathways that they've been working on. Serena Stepanovic, I think Serena's on the call too, talked about how they were preventing aflatoxin through social behavior change for markets, nutrition, and both. And Sarah Simons from Save the Children talked about the Lahia program and how they've been working with cowpeas as a nutritious cash crop. And so I think many of you are actually on the call now, so I'll just open it up to any of you. In fact, and anyone else that attended, Lad and Jenny, I can see you on the call as well. If you just want, if there are any key pieces of information that you wanted to share from that event or from the discussions that you were at the World Cafe. So I'll just give that a couple of minutes.
Hi, this is Jenny. Can you hear me?
I can. It's a little bit quiet. Maybe just increase the volume a little bit, but I can hear you.
Sure. So I just, my name is Jenny Lane. I'm from Land O'Lakes, and I was able to attend this event, which was really fascinating to me and very valuable. And I would just say that I thought one of the most important kind of take-home messages to me was the level of debate around kind of what a nutrition-sensitive value chain even looks like, and can value chains be nutrition-sensitive, and kind of the wide variety of opinions on how do we go about doing this. And I thought that that day was a particularly good venue for kind of just that discussion and of getting people's different opinions, because I kind of came from this thought of, oh, of course they should be nutrition sensitive, and it doesn't, not everyone is on that same page. So I thought that was really interesting.
Excellent, thank you, Jenny. And actually, you just given us a great segue into the next part of the session, because we thought that was really interesting as well. And so what we wanted to do here was open up that discussion again, and because it's hard in this large group to kind of provide feedback, we're going to break out into a couple of small groups, and Abby is going to lead us through this practical piece of it. For those of you who were in DC, it's a little bit of a repeat in the discussion about whether value chains should be nutrition sensitive or not, but we just kind of framed it in a little bit of a different way. We wanted to get some different inputs from different people. And then again, what we really wanted to think about was, okay, what are we, given there is a lot of interest in this conversation, there is a lot of stuff coming out already. I know the Ag community have got a presentation, I think it's this week or next week, along the similar lines. So we just wanted to really kind of dig into thoughts that you had for either us as a task force to take forward, or us as a wider community, and things that we can do. So with that, Abby, I'll hand it over to you to kind of lead us through the last piece.
Great, thanks Andrea, and thanks Jenny for your comments. Serena or Lara or Lad, if you guys have any thoughts you want to add, feel free to type them in the chat box related to the DC-based event. But Jenny really did give us a great segue, because coming out of the DC event, we did notice that there was kind of this debate or contention around should nutrition-sensitive value chains be a thing? Is that what we should be prioritizing? Should it be an income focus, or have the nutrition sensitivity worked in? We're not trying today to come up with a definitive answer to that, but we thought it might be an interesting forum to have kind of a debate around this. And so in just a moment, you're going to be broken into two different groups, and you've been randomly assigned these groups to think about either the for argument, so why we should be prioritizing nutrition-sensitive value chain activities over traditional ones, or against, why shouldn't we? And so in these discussions, we invite you to think about your own programming examples, projects you work on that either you see this working or not, and why. And dig into the discussion around should this be at the forefront of our minds, and why. And then in your 2 different groups, you will elect one representative who will then come back to plenary and present a few key arguments for why either we should be prioritizing or should not be. And so if your discussion takes a slightly different path, that's okay. We just want to kind of dig into this topic a little bit more. And so hopefully you don't have any questions. If you do, you can ask them once we break out into the groups. It'll be just a second. Yeah.
Oops. Okay.
All right. It looks like the people on the left have very organized notes as opposed to what we've been trying to do, or at least me on the other side. Great. Okay, Abby, do you want to lead us through this, the reporting back?
Yeah, it was interesting going back and forth between the 2 groups, and yeah, the level of organization on team against is a little bit lacking. But you guys can keep editing that box if you, I think. If you can't, that's fine. We can clean up the notes a little bit later. So is someone from the pro group ready to share your thoughts on the topic? Eric, is anyone from your group prepared?
This is Dan, Abby. Can you hear me, Abby?
Yes, I can. Thanks, Dan.
The 5 points. One is that for the livestock and crops that are more nutrition sensitive, they can also be consumed as well as sold. So kind of a plus. The number 2 item argument that we address the drivers of malnutrition by having access to nutritious foods. The third is nutrition sensitive value chains, not only about producing nutrient rich crops, but also looking at behavior change strategies and messaging and other activities that encourage behavior change to use income to purchase more nutritious foods. The fourth item, the context can create an opening for high-value nutrition crops where there are economic incentives. And then the fifth item is about gender power dynamics, that they're improved because women often have more control over income and consumption for more nutritious crops such as vegetables or small grains or for small livestock. Rather than for more income-focused crops or large livestock. And sometimes what happens in households is when there's a higher income crop or livestock, that income does not always, the woman does not have as much influence over that in terms of using that income to purchase nutritious food for their children.
Great, thank you, Dan. And in just a moment, we'll open it up to the whole group for others that were in that pro section to add any thoughts that they had. But first, we'll hear from the against group. What did you guys come up with for maybe why we shouldn't be prioritizing nutrition-sensitive value chains?
So yeah, Gitao here reporting back for the second group. I have to say it was a bit difficult for us to come up with arguments why not, because most of us believe we should, and we also know that USAID and other donors have prioritized this for justifiable reasons. But we've cited a few examples. One has to do with considering the preferences of farmers and value chain stakeholders. It's not always true that the value chains that are nutritionally sensitive are the value chains that are farmers want to invest in, or even market actors want to invest in. And that puts implementers in a difficult position of having to interject and influence the market in a way that's not facilitation. And then I think the other point is we realize it certainly adds a level of complexity. It's difficult enough for projects to do value chain development, even for traditional value chains. And just starting all the way from analysis, understanding what are the nutritional needs, and integrating those into value chain development can be quite difficult, and it's a complex task that most of our project staff might not be able to effectively address. But I think we said that there is an opportunity to work on behavior change. So if a project focuses on traditional value chains and enables farmers to increase incomes, for example, even though we know that that does not always translate into improved nutrition or other outcomes, I think the area, the leverage that projects have on behavior change means that the opportunity will still be there to influence the way the additional revenue is spent to improve nutrition. So I think that's, in summary, what we came up with, but I'll let any other team members feel free to add to that.
That's great, thanks, Gitao. A bit an unenviable task of trying to draw from our messy notes, but that was great.
Thanks, Gitao. And in the interest of time, we had a few technical difficulties and started a few minutes late. I do want to give us a chance to move into kind of a what's next, like what do we do with this topic within the task force and broader. But I did want to point out quickly that I noticed that social behavior change is on both the pro and against, that maybe the value chain itself doesn't have to be nutrition sensitive. There's another pathway of change of behavior to use the increased income on more nutritious foods, which is something that came up a bit in the DC event as well. Yeah, hopefully that discussion was interesting, and maybe you were on the side that you don't necessarily agree with, which I think is always good to help us think more critically about our position. And so I'm going to move us next to a different layout. Just 1 second. There's a lot of talk about nutrition-sensitive value chains happening. I'm receiving emails from the Ag2Net group often with different webinars or things being discussed around this topic. But within the TOP community, where do we want to go from here? Is there something within the task force that we can do? In DC, there was a lot of conversation around the limited amount of evidence from different projects. Do these activities actually work? Are there certain discussions within nutrition-sensitive value chains that you want to continue having? And what's the best forum to discuss these questions? Is it in-person events? Is it brown bags? Is it webinars? In DC, there are a few thoughts that we could have brown bags with AORs. You could do a webinar and have projects submit ideas, a series of webinars. But I would love to hear your thoughts on what you would like to see from the TOP community that we could possibly do related to this topic. And so you can either write in the chat box, or I'm going to mute my microphone and open it up to the floor for any thoughts that you have.
Abby, this is Dan. I think the idea of a series of webinars would be very positive, because that could also engage more of staff in the field. I mean, I love DC events, but I think webinars then also engage more of our field staff, because that's really where I think we need to learn from and share with, is those field staff.
Thanks, Dan. And I just say on that point, if you have any feedback from your field teams on specifically what they would be interested in, because sometimes that is different from the discussions that we have at HQ level, and just let us know by email or by the task force group. It would be great to figure out just kind of what the specific focus of those webinars are, and kind of how they are Are they live? Are they put on a CD? Or are they, like, how does that all work? Just because I know it's a different audience in terms of accessing people.
Great point, Andrea. Anyone else?
Andrea, this is Sandra. Just another suggestion. I mean, I like the idea of the webinars. I think if we can be as concrete as possible and give really people examples. And I think one topic is really the post-harvest and processing and how we can maintain the nutrient content throughout the post-harvest period. I think that's definitely something that people want to know more about. Just an idea.
Great, thank you, Sandrine. Okay, Abby, I think we're on the hour, so we should probably finish up unless you have any last thoughts on that. Okay, great. So continue to put your ideas in the chat box. Please send them to us in any way you can. Thank you everyone for joining the call. Sorry, we run a couple of minutes over today. And just to let you know that the next task force meeting will have an ag nutrition focus. And maybe we can just close by saying thanks everyone for joining. And Abby, you could just give us a final update on the next task force meeting.
Can everyone hear me? So the next task force meeting is going to be in conjunction with the Nutrition and Food Technology Task Force for TOP. And we are collaborating with Laura Iannati, who is an associate professor at Brown School Institute for Public Health from Washington University in St. Louis. And we'll be talking a little bit about animal source foods. So the exact focus is to be determined, but we look forward to seeing you all there and to collaborate a little bit with our nutrition colleagues within TOP.
Great, thanks Abby. Okay, thanks everyone. Speak to you all again.